Hello everybody, I'm Molly and today we're going to run through the kitchen detective activity. The aim of the activity is to introduce chromatography as an idea to the children, but can also be a way of showing them how science can be used as a tool to solve real-life problems. Chromatography is a technique used to separate mixtures, such as colours and ink, by passing them through a stationary material using a moving solvent. Our stationary material here is the filter paper, and the solvent is the water. As the water travels up the paper, it carries the ink components in different speeds depending on their solubility, separating them into distinct colours. Scientists use this to investigate what makes up a mixture in the lab, or by scientists to investigate clues in crime scenes by looking at the splitting patterns. This experiment was designed at around Key Stage 2 Year 3 classes, but please feel free to adapt it to whatever would suit your class. This is what you will need. First, you're going to need some felt tip pens, all black but of different colours, so that they can separate out and produce different patterns. Then you're going to need some circular filter paper to make the butterflies, and some rectangular filter paper in order to run the Kitchen Detective Activity 3 section. I have used the circular filter paper and just cut it up into squares. You will then also need some either small plastic cups. I'm going to use small beakers here, but the key to this is that it has to be smaller than the filter paper folded up. This I'll show you in a minute. You're also going to need some water and some pipe cleaners. You can also choose to use string if you want to hang your butterflies up as well. It's good to test out this activity beforehand because some pens have better splitting than others, and it also depends on the filter paper you're using as well. Here's a couple that I've done earlier, and as you can see, the splitting patterns are different, so you can identify the two different types of pen. This is useful because you want to be able to compare it to an original splitting pattern so that the children can try and identify who stole the certain item. It's also really good to try out the first couple of activities to make your butterflies, as I've done here, because the running of inks are very different in different beakers and different filter papers and different inks, and where you draw them as well gives a bunch of different patterns and designs, so you might need to test this out a couple of times just to see what works best for your setup. Okay, let's move on to the first activity. To introduce the children to the idea of how chromatography works, a fun task is to try and let them discover how it happens when folded up filter paper is put slightly into a cup of water. Let me show you how I did this. First thing I'm going to do here is get my circular filter paper and fold it up into quarters. So in half like this, and in half again, so that when you fold it out, you have 4 sections. And then what the children can do is, if you give them the pen that has the best splitting pattern, for me it's the Crayola Super Tips, and get them to draw something in each of the sections. So like, for example, here I can draw a line, here I can draw a heart, here I can draw a smiley face, and here I can draw a star. The smaller the better in this section because you need the water to be able to run. And then what you're going to do is fold that up and turn it into a cone like this. And then what I do again is I fold this in half like this so it stands easier within the beaker or your plastic cup or whatever. And then this next bit's really important. You need to be able to get your glass beaker or cup or anything, and this bit here needs to be smaller than this bit here of your filter paper. And very importantly, the waterline, when it sits in, needs to be lower than the designs the children have drawn on the segments. So when they do draw their lines on the segments, make sure they do it about halfway up. And then what you have to do is just pop it into the water like that, and just watch the colours run through the filter paper. The thicker bits will go quicker, the slower bits will go slower. I've tested this quite a few different times now and it works nicely. At this part here, you can really see how the different colours are starting to separate out from each other. So the red separates out first because that runs the slowest, and then the brown separates into a green and a blue, and if you leave it long enough so you can then see the yellow. So at this point, it would be a very good idea to try and get the children to explain what's happening. Try and get them to explain how the different colours are separating out from each other, how the water is pushing the ink up through the filter paper. Try and get them to describe the different colours that they can see, and try and get them to describe which colours come out first, and so must be travelling the slowest. And then try and get them to describe which colours come out last, so these are the colours that travel the quickest. I'm just waiting for the water to reach the top edge, and then I'm going to take it out and let this to dry. So this is the part here where I'm happy with how far it's run. I can see all the different colours going on. And so I'm going to take this out, unfold it. And these are the fun patterns that I'm left with in this circumstance. I'm going to then leave this one to dry. You could pop it in somewhere warm to help it dry out quicker, or on a washing line, or if you have a drying rack for different colour paints, perhaps pop it on there. While this is happening, you could skip to exercise 3 if you don't have enough time to wait for this to dry to make the butterflies out of this, and then move on to activity 3. At this point, it's a very good idea to introduce the idea of what chromatography is to the children, because it explains how the ink ran through the filter paper as previously just seen. On to the second activity. After making the funky patterns on the filter paper, this next activity is really fun because it allows the children to make butterflies out of these that they can then take home. This is how you complete this. So at this point, just of here, our filter paper from the first activity is dried. All of their different drawings and colourings have been split into different colours and look very beautiful and fantastical. So what you first want to do is you want to identify some of the parts of the filter paper that is more white that you don't mind scrunching, turning into the middle. So I'm going to choose like just of here. And what you want to do is you want to like scrunch just this middle bit so that the rest of the filter paper turns into wings. And once you have that middle bit scrunched, you can like fluff out, even though it's not fluffy, but you can sort of span out the rest of it, sort of like that. And then what you want to do is you want to get a section of pipe cleaner. It might be easier if you cut the pipe cleaner to size beforehand. I've just chosen a bit of orange just here. And then you want to wrap it around your middle bit. You can do this once or twice depending on how secure you want your butterfly. And then I would recommend just twisting the 2 antennas at the end like that. And you can curl these round into whatever you think works best. From here, you can also add a bit of string to this middle bit, or a piece of fishing wire. That would probably work really well because you wouldn't be able to see it. And then from there, you can then allow the children to take these home, hang them up and show them off. So our third and final activity today is the kitchen detectives part. In this activity, you're trying to get the children to try and solve a mystery of who stole something. In this example, I'm going to use a cookie out of a jar. Most importantly, to allow this to work, you need to identify that there's been a note left behind, wrote in a certain colour pen, and that you have previously used the chromatography technique to separate out the colours from this. This will then allow the children to investigate a different variety of pens linked to different suspects to see which one matches the one on the note of who stole the cookie. The key to this activity is to have different brands of black felt tip pens so that the children can use chromatography and see the different splitting patterns and match them to the one in the note. So in terms of setting the scene, this is what I would do. I would explain to the children that somebody in the staff room has stolen all of the biscuits and left a note behind saying, "You'll never catch me." You can then say, "We did a test using chromatography and it gave this splitting pattern," and then show them the splitting pattern. I would then finish off with explaining, can you use chromatography to help us identify who left this note? On to the instructions for the last activity. The amount of help each child will need will really depend on their needs and how much you think they can do it by themselves. So for example, you might have to set a few things up or demonstrate them and go a little bit slower if it's younger children. Okay, so for the third activity, this is the part where we're trying to understand who wrote the mysterious note and stole the cookies. So with this, I'm going to get the children into different groups and give them all one of the different pens. So the different pens represent different suspects, and whichever pen matches the pattern previously run and that you have as the clue previously left behind by the note can then be identified as the suspect. The key bit is that you have to get them to draw a line at the bottom of the paper, not too deep, about 1 centimetre in. So I'm going to do that one just up there, this one just up there, and my last one just up there, like that. And then you're going to get a slightly bigger either beaker or tray or anything that can hold a very shallow amount of water. So I'm going to get this beaker and fill it up with less than 1 centimetre deep of water. And then what I'm going to do is, on these pieces of paper, mark who is suspect 1, 2, and 3, preferably with a pencil. And then you're going to get your squares and fold them in half and then pop them into the water like so that the water can drag the ink up the paper. If you have time for it in your lesson, if you allow it to run as far up the filter paper as possible, you get the best separation in the different colours of pen, and so it makes it easier to distinguish between the different brands. This is why it's so important to set up your thief pen example beforehand, so that you don't have to wait for that to happen. And this is also why I would recommend running all 3 at the same time, because each one has taken me at least about 10 minutes. Okay, so once your filter papers are relatively dry, they don't have to be super duper dry for this part, they just have to be dry enough that the children can handle them and ink not go everywhere. You can then compare it to your thief. So this is the thief that I ran alongside. I ran this literally at the same time as the rest of them, but as you can see, it still ran a little bit differently. What you want to try and get the children to try and pick out from this is that our thief colours here are very similar to our second pen in terms of the vibrancy. You can also see how this pen has a very small section of yellow, which is very indicative of 2 and nothing like 1. You can see how it's really distinguishably different from the third one, so it's definitely not that. So for example, you could rule this suspect out pretty quickly. And then between these two, if you try and explain how these 2 are more bright, these 2 are more vibrant, these 2 have very similar yellow sections, as in this one and the thief doesn't look like it has similar yellow sections. They're a lot duller and the colours are a little bit more different. So then from here, you can really then play up the whole, it was Mrs. Hall who used the second pen to write the notes, therefore she must be the thief of the cookie biscuits. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope this video was helpful and inspirational for your lesson plans. Please check out our other experiments, videos, and pupil resources on our website. And if you have any questions, feedback, or would like to request a visit, please use the Contact Us section in the website to get in touch. Thank you so much. Bye.